All right, we are live on the PHU Dynasty podcast. I'm here today with an extremely special guest. This is Charlie Campbell of WalterFootball.com. Charlie's the senior draft analyst over there and has been for, quite a while now. But
Yep.
he is arguably the most underrated person in all of draft media as far as the mock drafts are concerned. You hear about the Kuipers, you hear about the McShays, but you're talking about the number one mock draft accuracy. I think 3 or 4 of the last 5 years, and then second place last year. I think is 2017, 2019, 2022 is the most accurate in terms of NFL media correct picks. So that's definitely a cool accomplishment, and I think a lot of guys on this league are ready to roll and hear what you have to say about some of these draft prospects. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to talk to you, Eric, and catch up. And for the rest of the guys in the league, I'm happy to help in any way I can. And here it's an awesome league from Andrew Scavelli and Eric and all the cool stuff you guys have done for your league drafts. So that's really awesome. You got a special thing going there. So that's really sweet.
Yeah, maybe we take it a little bit too seriously at times, but it's still fun to get the boys together. And these rookie drafts are really kind of the bread and butter of this league. It's what we look forward to every year. So getting a guest like you to come on and hear your thoughts and opinions on some of these guys, that's what we're here for. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So I have kind of laid out Charlie's top 10 from what's currently published on Walter Football. I should say it might have changed since then. But when I did this, it was the current published stuff. So we'll go through some of these top 10 rankings, and I have a few questions kind of based on some of the prospects that we're going to see. So let's start it right off here at the top with, I got to get this stupid layout right. There we go. So obviously, I think most people are going to say Bijan's number one at running back at this point. He seems like the 3-down workhorse. What are your thoughts on Bijan as far as his overall draft capital? Because in Dynasty, that's pretty important for us. Where they get drafted, because that's going to tell us, maybe long-term how often they're going to be used and how long their longevity is going to be. So, where are you thinking Bijan's going to end up?
Well, right now I think I have him going to Detroit, and I think he goes in the top 20. So with Detroit having 2 spots there at 6 and 18, he won't get past them at 18. I strongly believe. But if they don't take him at 6, an unexpected team could snatch him up between those spots, because I know a lot of teams in the league have him as the top player on their board. So with a talent like him, because he is 6 foot, 215, 220, just amazing elusiveness and vision and great character, but teams also just love his receiving ability. I've had scouts tell me that were with Carolina that Bijan runs routes like Christian McCaffrey, except he's bigger. So receiving ability wise, he's going to be phenomenal as well for the NFL. So he's the real deal. He's a complete package. I think whether it's Detroit or maybe, there could be a surprise team, so there's been some chatter about New England being really enamored with him. You could be some other surprise in there, like say Washington, with Antonio Gibson in the last year of his contract, and be a guy to pair with Brian Robinson long term. And so there could be a surprise in there. Philadelphia, of course, has been linked to him as well. So I think any of those teams would still be a good team, would be a good fit to draft him. I think the one bad part about Detroit for him from a fantasy perspective is, David Montgomery is going to get a good amount of work as well. But it'll be similar to last year when they had a healthy DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, where they really utilized both guys. So if he does go to Detroit, I would think he's still going to be a really valuable fantasy starter, especially long term.
And I think Detroit might be with the new regime there over the last couple of years, really in the BPA kind of mindset and just taking best player available. And if they're true to that, then Bijan might be their number one guy on the board, like you mentioned. Let's
Hmm.
go to number 2 here with Jahmyr Gibbs. I think from just from reading WalterFootball.com all the time, everything I'm hearing from you is that teams might be much higher on Gibbs than maybe the media is right now.
Yep.
What can you say about that? I've seen him on number 7 on your big board.
Yeah, Gibbs, I know some teams that have him with an elite grade, and he's one of the few players with an elite grade in the draft. And there's just a lot of, he's just such a special playmaker, so dynamic as a receiver, amazing speed, also special teams ability to return kicks. But he's a phenomenal receiver. He's, as one scout told me, he's Alvin Kamara, except a bit tougher, a little bit stronger build. And Gibbs is a great kid too. So this is kind of a unique draft where Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Quentin Johnston, the receiver from TCU, some of the top skill position guys have just been getting rave reviews from the character standpoint. But I would be shocked if Gibbs does not go in the first round. I think if Bijan Robinson goes off the board before the Lions pick at 18, I think Gibbs could be in play there. And then I think you have a lot of potential landing spots in the 20s. Teams like the Chargers could be in play with the Eckler situation, Dallas, Buffalo, Philadelphia again at 30, the Chiefs at 31. He's such a great fit for NFL offenses right now because he is such a dynamic receiver, and he is an explosive, dangerously fast receiver that can, or runner that can score on any touch. So the NFL is looking for these playmakers, and he definitely fits.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to have those two guys kind of at the 1-2, like you mentioned, because they are 3 down backs, and both of those guys, will fit pretty much any offense. It seems like at this point. As we head down the list, I feel like there's a pretty big tier break here between 2 and 3, and I guess we can maybe cover this in more of a blanket type statement. But do you think outside of Gibbs and Robinson, I don't think there's going to be another first round back. So are there
Yeah.
any other 3 down backs that you see at this point between your 3 and 10 here?
Well, Kendre Miller and Zach Charbonnet could go in the second round and be 3 down backs, kind of maybe in your Kenneth Walker mold from last year. Those kind of typical second round picks that end up becoming good starters in the NFL. A Chain from Texas A&M is similar to Gibbs, lightning fast. A Chain's a bit smaller, but just a few days ago I had a team scout text me. It was reading my mock and said I had A Chain a little too low in the high in the third round, that he would go in the second. So he might not be a true 3 down guy though, given that he's undersized for that kind of role in the NFL.
Right.
And so, but then aside from them, I think Zach Evans, really intriguing guy, super talented, really good skill set. Things just never kind of came together for him as far as staying healthy in the situation, and being in platoon backfields at TCU and Ole Miss. But he's got the physical talent to be a 3 down starter as well. And then some of those other guys back behind them, all of those guys could be, third, fourth round picks that end up being nice values. It would not surprise me at all if Chris Rodriguez and Chase Brown end up being mid-round steals, and maybe not quite as good as Damian Pierce was last year, but in the years to come could be really good players. Both Rodriguez and Brown really remind me of Jamal Williams as far as that kind of downhill, hard-nosed back, strong physical, good at the goal line, good in short yardage, maybe a little bit better receiving ability than you would think for guys built the way they are. So this is a strong running back class, and I think among these top 10, aside from the stars at the top, there's going to be some nice fantasy players from this group in the years to come.
Yeah, dynasty players, specifically our league, we love running backs and we love to find them later on in the draft because they can kind of get that immediate impact, whereas receivers and tight ends take a little bit longer to kind of develop.
Right.
One guy I did notice as I was reading through your top 10 and maybe started the year much higher on people's positional rankings was Sean Tucker. I noticed you had him outside the top 10. What can you say about Tucker?
Well, I know that teams had some mid-round grades on him. They felt that he was a nice college player, but skill set wise, just might be more of a number two back in the NFL, is kind of what they thought, just in terms of the physical talent. So, but there are times where there are solid number two backs, and then an injury happens and they become a valuable starter in fantasy. So I definitely wouldn't rule him out as a late round pick. And then, I think you could find some other guys like that. Roshan Johnson from Texas could be another one of those kind of late rounders that ends up being a nice value, goes to a good situation. I love Deuce Vaughn from Kansas State. He's
Yep.
kind of like a similar to Darren Sproles, a little different, but tiny guy, height wise, but built tough, amazing elusiveness, big play speed, really good receiver. So I think he could be a steal in this draft and end up being a guy that's valuable to have in fantasy, whether he's kind of a flex starter candidate or as a backup you kind of stash, and then an injury could happen and he ends up being a nice starter for you. And then, I mean, there are other guys too. Evan Hall from Northwestern could fit in that mold as well. So between Tucker and Hall and Vaughn and Johnson, this is a really nice year to be picking up some kind of late round steal potential guys.
Yeah, it seems like running back is this is probably one of the deeper classes in recent memory as far as running backs are concerned. Let's go ahead and move forward here to the receivers. The receivers are, generally speaking, in dynasty leagues, probably more of like a gold type position because they do last longer. They have the longevity over the running back, so they tend to go pretty high in our drafts. This year is a very I just want to call it interesting year at receiver.
Yeah.
I hate this. There's kind of a weak word for it, but there's just not that top guy that we're kind of used to seeing. There's kind of a little bit of a question mark on who's going to go in the first round potentially. So I guess my first question to kind of lead off with this receiver group would be, like how many receivers are you actually expecting to go in the first round of this draft? Because from what I can tell and reading, different things around the media circles, we could have just one, or we could potentially have four from what I'm seeing. So what are you thinking?
I think there'll be four. I think Quentin Johnston, Smith Najigba, Jordan Addison, and Zay Flowers will go in the first round. And it is all of those guys could be the first receiver off the board or the last of that four. And wow. I surveyed teams on it, and really there wasn't a consensus wide receiver one. There wasn't like, say Jamar Chase, where everybody had him as the top receiver in the draft. And the teams feel it's all going to come down to scheme, who, for as far as the team, what kind of receiver they need that fits their scheme, but also what they have on their roster. So if it's a team, say that has, already some big receivers in place, they might be more interested in a slot guy like Smith Najigba or smaller speed receivers like Addison or Flowers. And if they already have some smaller speed guys and they want some size, they're probably going to look at Quentin Johnston. So that's real interesting is a good word, because I'm really interested, and it's tough to predict what order they're going to come off the board, what teams, and where they land is going to be fascinating to me, and it's going to have a huge impact, I think, on kind of how valuable they'll be for fantasy.
So out of those top four, and I think you could say this for almost all the receivers in this class, but there is kind of that one question mark for most of these guys. I mean, even
Hmm.
with Jackson Smith and Jigba, everybody knows he's a quality, talented player, but he was hurt all last year. So
Right.
out of these top four, which one of these guys really scares you the most? Which one would you be most turned off by, or maybe not want to draft based on some things you've heard, or injuries or talent or anything like that?
Well, for me, the Jordan Addison kind of scares me from a size perspective because he's so small. So anytime you have a receiver that's, in the 170s or about 180, that concerns me for durability in the NFL and, avoiding injury and staying on the field. So that would be the biggest one for me. Zay Flowers isn't much bigger, so that's to me a kind of he was more durable in college, but still, the size wise, I should say he was more durable in college than you would think size wise, but he still has that concern for the NFL. So those two have that. Smith Najigba, I had teams say, when he was in the slot, he was really good. They gave him, kind of a top grade for his work as a slot, but they gave him a lower grade for what he did as an outside receiver. So I think that's going to be really important for where he lands. If say a team takes him like maybe New England that already has some guys who play slot, that might not be as good a fit because if they're gonna try and push him to be an outside receiver. But if he lands with say the Texans, like say the Texans get C.J. Stroud and then they follow up with Smith Najigba at 12, I think that could make him more valuable for fantasy because he's the instant number one receiver for them and already has a history with the quarterback. And so that landing spot's going to be huge for him. And Quentin Johnston's similar. I mean, there are questions about the hands, but there aren't that many 6'3", 220-pound receivers that can run like him. So
No.
he's a big play threat. Can do a lot of different things, and he's a great kid too. So he's going to work hard, and I think he'll work hard at with the jugs machine and take to the NFL coaching, and I think his hands will improve. So it is an interesting class. I'm really excited to see how it all shakes out, and it's makes my job tougher because it's not so clear cut, but it'll make the draft more fun to watch.
Yeah, I think us as fans, we're gonna have a little bit of a draft party, and frankly, like this might be one of the more unpredictable drafts. I mean, it just doesn't seem like there's any of these,
Definitely.
and I would say we're still a week or two away here, but it just doesn't
Mhm.
feel like there's any locks, even from the quarterbacks. Like I don't think anybody really knows who's going one at this point, and I feel like in years
Yeah,
past we have.
right.
Um, and maybe while we're on that point, so our league doesn't really maybe value quarterbacks as much as others. We run one quarterback in our league, so I know there's others out there that do super flex leagues, which really heighten the importance of quarterbacks. Um, do you have a favorite out of maybe those top four guys at this point, or do you think that it's even top three if you kind of don't think Levis is really in that conversation? I know people feel different ways about that. So what is your thoughts just real quick on the quarterback class?
Yeah, I like Bryce Young the most, and I think that from what I've heard from teams and how smart he is and how crazy he is in terms of preparation and knowing everything about the team he's going against and his own system, I could see him transitioning pretty quickly to the NFL. And Carolina, I think will take him at 1 overall, and that's a wide open division. So wouldn't surprise me if he has a good start to his career, assuming that the DJ Chark stays healthy and Adam Thielen still
Thielen,
has
yep.
a little something left in the tank to help him. Um, but yeah, I like him the most. Stroud can really throw the ball. He can rip it. I think if he goes to Houston and they get him a nice receiver, over time, he could turn into a quality pro starter. And Anthony Richardson's the ultimate boom or bust guy. He could end up being like Cam Newton or Lamar, an amazing fantasy player, or he could be a giant bust. But he's got to get more accurate in the short to intermediate part of the field to be a competent starter in the NFL. And I'm not a big fan of Levis, just because the feel is lacking, the instincts are lacking, holds the ball way too long, which leads to sacks and turnovers and negative plays. So I wouldn't touch him in terms of fantasy. I'd wait to see him prove it before I'd consider adding him to my team.
Yeah, I saw some mocks recently with Levis heading to the Bucks at 19, and I shuddered a little bit. I was like, I don't know about that, guys. I feel like
Yeah.
that might be a little premature. I feel like when I watch him play, it's more of a developmental, maybe second to third round kind of guy, whereas there's
Right.
talk of him going at 4 overall potentially to the Colts, which blows my mind. But maybe
Yeah,
they
well,
fell in love with
the
him.
position and the need, and there's always teams that are in, a real rough situation at the quarterback position. So you see guys get forced into it and run up there that don't belong, whether it's a Christian Ponder or EJ Manuel, or, I knew teams that had a day 2 grade on Baker Mayfield and he goes number 1 overall. So, that's just the nature of the position in the NFL.
Yeah, they always get pushed up, and those are our favorite picks to watch as as mock drafters, and because it's just fun to laugh and say, wow, I can't believe that happened. So
Right.
let's dive back into the receivers a little bit here. We talked about the top 4 guys. I think there's maybe a few surprises potentially on your top 5 as opposed to maybe some of the rest of the media. Specifically, I think in number 5, really, Jonathan Mingo. I've watched definitely a little bit of his game. He does seem like a bit of an outlier this year as far as his size, his grittiness. Whereas I feel like a lot of maybe the top 15 receivers this year are kind of in that smaller speed type game, and there's not as many of these 6'2", 220 kind of guys that we've seen in years past. So is that why Mingo is kind of up your board, or are you just hearing different things from scouts?
Yeah, I know a few teams that really like him as a potential second round pick. So
Wow.
I think he will go in the second round, and they see him as having starting potential in the NFL. Maybe not elite number 1, but a solid number 2 kind of guy. And he's just a super competitive receiver, tracks the ball well, has late hands, really good size to shield off defenders. And the Senior Bowl really helped him because he showed some of the teams that were skeptical of him weren't sure about how quick he was and the ability to separate, and he showed that at Senior Bowl, and then ran well here before the draft as well. So this draft isn't especially strong or deep at receiver, so that helps him. But I think he'll go in the second round, and he might end up being just a solid number 2 receiver. And we all know with those kind of guys, it really depends on where they land in terms of value. If the Chiefs take him, or the Chargers, that's going to make him a lot more appealing than, say if he goes to Washington or Atlanta or a place like that where you're not sure how the quarterback situation will end up, helping or hurting him in the future. Complete question mark there. So, but I think he'll go in the second round, and I think he has the ability to be a solid starter.
Yes, I feel like Mingo and maybe even Cedric Tillman, Michael Wilson,
Yep.
Rashee Rice, those are guys that outside of WalterFootball, I've seen significantly lower, and some of the smaller receivers pushed up. Specifically, we could talk about Josh Downs that you have at 10. I've seen Josh Downs, mocked at the beginning of the second round, sometimes even the end of the first round, and he did have a really good year with North Carolina last year and looked pretty good. But he's also just one of these guys that are much smaller, and it maybe just he's very stuck in a potential role as a slot receiver in the NFL. Whereas maybe Michael Wilson, Rashee Rice, Cedric Tillman, and Mingo would all be kind of more of that prototype, X receiver in that kind of Dwayne Bowe type of role, if you will.
Right.
And I maybe is that why do you think those guys you have them ranked ahead of a guy like Josh Downs?
Yeah, and I think I might be a little low on Downs. I could see him going in the second round, maybe not high in the second, but going in the mid to, back half of it. Similar to some of these other guys that we've seen in recent years, like Tutu Atwell, for
Right.
example. But yeah, there is the super small concern again because he's 5'9", 171, which is really small for a pro receiver, limits him to playing in the slot. And he is explosive and fast, but I think, again, the team fit will be huge. But yeah, he could end up being a second rounder. Same with Tillman. And I think Tillman is a bit of a sleeper because he was hurt last year, but the previous season he was really impressive for Tennessee. And because of the injury, it let Jalen Hyatt have a breakout year. But Jalen Hyatt's kind of a one-trick pony receiver, so he's a
He's giving me
deep
some Will
ball.
Fuller vibes.
Yeah, very similar. And deep ball receiver can stretch defenses, but is not kind of a guy that can run every route and do a variety of things. So if he goes to the right team, he could be worth taking. But if you don't like the fit, if it's not obvious, he might not be a good fantasy guy because he might frustrate you with a huge game and then disappears for a month and just kind of makes you pull your hair out as to whether you're going to start him or not, and whether he's going to show up and give you a monster day or just end up giving you nothing.
Yeah, some of these guys in this league don't even have any hair anymore because they just keep pulling out, drafting guys like Jalen Hyatt. So we'll have to see where he ends up getting drafted because he's another situational guy. He ends up with the Chargers and somebody with a big arm. Maybe you'd be more
Right.
willing to take a chance on him. Just to see where his draft capital ends up too. To be mindful of your time. Let's keep moving along here. We'll go to the tight ends, and this is a tight end class that I feel like is very hyped up for sure,
Hmm.
and for good reason, in my opinion. I feel like
Yep.
everybody in this league specifically knows how much I love the tight end position in general. I just feel like it's a fun position to evaluate. You have to have some blocking chops like a lineman. You also have to receive, like a wide receiver. So it is a fun position for fantasy, and it's really tough for us fantasy and specifically dynasty players to kind of pick out who's going to be a good long-term tight end because they do take a while to develop. A guy like Trey McBride from last year really didn't do a
Hmm.
whole lot. Most tight ends take at least a couple of years to even see any production out of. So
Right.
I guess out of this group, are you buying the hype first? And then second, do you see one of these guys kind of being an instant contributor because those are going to be the most valuable for the dynasty players?
Well, I do buy the hype and the class talent overall. I think really the top six there could all turn into really good pros.
It looks like we may have lost Charlie there right as we were getting to my favorite position.
I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to contribute some as rookies and play pretty well. Definitely, I think Laporta's a bit of a sleeper that could be a giant steal. Just excellent after the catch and good blocker as well. So I think that's going to help him to see the field. Like you said, tight ends can take longer to develop because coaches have to trust that they're going to do their blocking correctly in terms of if they are having them help protect a quarterback. They don't want to put in a tight end who's a weak blocker and then your quarterback goes down with an injury. So that's kind of part of the process there, like you said. And Darnell Washington's a great blocker in terms of just the size where he can actually go in there and block interior defensive linemen and big edge rushers in a way that most tight ends cannot. But I don't think he's ever going to be a very prolific receiving tight end in the NFL. So that's kind of the drawback to taking him. But I think Kincaid, Mayer, and Laporta could all be starting tight ends for fantasy teams in the years to come. I think Musgrave and Tucker Kraft have that potential as well because they have big upside as receivers. There's definitely some good options there. And even in the late rounds, some of these guys might not be worth drafting, but there could be worth keeping an eye on in terms of pickups in the future, like Wiley from Cincinnati or Latu or Schoonmaker. So those guys, I think, could end up, maybe 2-3 years down the road, be someone you'd be thinking of as maybe a backup tight end if they develop like they have the potential to.
Is there you were talking about the draft, and you take a tight end and they do have to develop and they do spend a lot of time blocking, and trying to figure all that out. I have one guy on this list that I really love as a receiver, but man, I really don't think he can block. And it scares me for his, potential to maybe get on the field, because I kind of look at him as a very specific scheme fit, almost like a Mike Gesicki kind of guy. And I think it's Tucker Kraft. Is there anybody else on that list? Maybe like Luke Musgrave potentially as well.
Yeah, those two. That's why they're a little bit behind those guys ahead of them, is because they need a little more development in the blocking part of the game to become 3-down starters. But Mayer needs to improve his blocking as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is a bit of a platoon guy early on while the blocking kind of gets rounded into form. But yeah, I think Musgrave and Kraft have big upside as receivers, and they might have some time where they're kind of rotated in, but year 2, year 3, they're effective starters and guys that could be good contributing receivers.
All right, sweet. Yes, we'll have one last question for you as a kind of a parting shot, since we already kind of talked about potential first-round picks at the receiver and wide and the running back position. How many of these tight ends do you realistically see going in the first? I feel like it's a position that, in the past you maybe sprinkle one a year, maybe even two if it's a good class. But with the athletic testing for some of these guys doing, better than a lot of people expected, maybe potentially for Laporta, for Musgrave, and then Musgrave also had an excellent Senior Bowl. How many tight ends are we going to see in maybe the back end of this first round?
I think we'll have two for sure. Well, I would say definitely one. I think Kincaid is definitely a first rounder. I think Mayer is a little bit on the bubble, but I do have him going in the first round of my mock. And I know teams that love Laporta and are worried that someone's going to take him in the first round. And he was phenomenal at the combine. And I know teams that are targeting him in the second round and are hoping and praying he gets to their second round pick. So he is a sneaky sleeper for the first round as well. So I think at least one, and at most three. But there are a lot of mocks that have Darnell Washington going in the first round, and I can't completely rule that out because he is such a unique guy at 6'6", 270. I could see a team that's picking late in the first round that says, gosh, this guy could be a real help for us blocking wise and protecting our quarterback, and has, some receiving ability and upside. And he's such a rare and special commodity in terms of, you just don't find tight ends that could block a defensive tackle. You never see that. And he's shown that on tape. You've seen him block 5 techniques and, block defensive linemen. He's not like grabbing them and tossing them around and, throwing them around the field, but he's tying them up. He's keeping them from getting into the play just because he's so long and so big that he occupies them. And that's something that isn't lost on the coaches and what that unique kind of skill is for a player to have. I mean, it really would not shock me if Washington plays like Mercedes Lewis Long career, because
Yeah.
he could last forever just based on the size and strength that he already has. So he might not ever be a prolific fantasy guy, but it wouldn't shock me if some team did take him late in the first round.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a really, really fun first round for fantasy players just because of the uncertainty. And there are, I would say at this point, we've probably talked about 10 total players that, from a skill position perspective, and then not even counting the quarterbacks. I mean, maybe half the
Yeah,
draft could be, fantasy relevant people.
this is probably, I would say, the toughest draft in maybe 10 years for me to predict. So, because it is very wide open, it doesn't have kind of a real locked in top, 7, 8 guys where, say, for example, 2 years ago, where you knew 3 quarterbacks were going in the top three, and then you knew Jamar Chase and Penny Sewell and Kyle Pitts were going to be all going quickly from there, and that pretty much you knew who was going in the top 10. Just it was plain as day almost. But this year is very up in the air as to who, especially those picks at 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, that's really tough for me to predict right now, and I do this every day all year. So, this is going to be a fascinating draft, and I'm really excited for it. I'm hoping everything comes out well, accuracy wise, but I know it's going to be a challenge. So, I'm not anticipating the greatest year ever. There could be a luck factor involved that I hope shines on me, but definitely it's going to be fun to watch, and I can't wait for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are excited to see your mock drafts in the coming weeks to see how they shake out as you hear more from your sources, and
Yep.
as we get closer to the draft, it seems like things may be potentially solidifying a little bit more at the top. But we'll all
Right.
be watching for sure on WalterFootball.com. I know everybody in this league has followed you in some capacity, whether it be at Pewter Report, Walter Football over the last decade. So we are super appreciative of you coming on and spending about a half an hour with us
Anytime.
here. It's a great
Yeah,
time,
no,
man.
it's great to see you, man. Good to talk with you and catch up a little bit. And we'll have to do it in Tampa, and maybe, depending on how things go with your guys' league and being spread out. But if you guys are in Tampa at all, we should all get together,
Oh, man, you heard that, boys.
have some beer and cigars and Ebor or something.
We can definitely do that. We've been talking for quite a while about doing a winter meetings, if you will, of the Dynasty League.
Nice.
Just a coaches meetings. Maybe to get everybody together. So the problem is if you do that, you have to answer our questions for like 4 hours straight. And I'm not sure if you want to do
Problem. No
that.
problem. It'd be great to see you. And for the guys that know, Andrew's super close with me and my family as well. So I'd love to do it. Be great to hang out with all you guys and hear the stories of the league and your drafts and everything else.
There's always something going on in our league. But yes, thank you again for your time, and we really appreciate it. So make sure you go check out Charlie if you haven't been following recently. Go check his mocks. Go check everything on Walter Football, and we'll see y'all later.
Take care.